An ordinary terraced house in South Shields was the scene of one of the most sinister cases of poltergeist activity in the UK. It was December of 2005, and instead of preparing for Christmas, this unfortunate family were about to face a terrifying battle with a vicious and twisted supernatural enemy. Marianne and Mark began to notice little things at first. Small objects, mundane things like keys, jewellery, and even cutlery started to vanish without a trace, only to reappear days later in the most unexpected places. One evening, Marianne was frantically searching for her wedding ring. She distinctly remembered placing it on her bedside table the night before, yet now it was gone. After hours of desperate searching, she found it nestled inside a teacup in the kitchen. And this wasn't an isolated incident either. Keys would vanish from their designated hooks, only to be found later in the refrigerator or inside a shoe in the hallway. Mark's wristwatch, which he always kept on his dresser, disappeared. And days later it was found ticking away on their son's toy chest. The strange occurrences then seemed to switch focus to the youngest member of the family, 3-year-old Robert, and his toys, particularly a rocking horse. His rocking horse would appear to be moved at random between the landing area and the bedrooms, and it would be placed upside down or tipped over, a game that culminated in a move that terrified the family when Ian, Marianne's brother, found the rocking horse hung ominously by its reins, swinging gently from the loft hatch, placed there by unseen hands. Robert's toy cars, usually scattered harmlessly around his room, were inexplicably thrown at Marianne and Mark, often with such force that they left bruises. The cars would sometimes strike Marianne in the back as she descended the stairs. A yellow plastic bolt from Robert's toy tool set was thrown at Marianne with great force while she stood in her son's room. In a similar vein, Robert's toy blocks, usually harmless playthings, became projectiles hurled by an unseen force. On one occasion, a block was captured on a mobile phone being thrown across the room, only for the video to be mysteriously deleted moments later. The entity also seemed to take a particular interest in Robert's toy animals, which were often found moved or positioned in ways that suggested they were being manipulated by an invisible person. For example, a teddy bear was once found sitting on Robert's bed, but surrounded by other toys arranged in a circle around it, as if they were participating in some kind of sinister ritual. One particularly chilling moment came on a quiet evening when Ian went to check on Robert. As he ascended the stairs, he suddenly froze on the spot. His heart skipped a beat, because there, at the top of the staircase, in the dim light, sat Robert's favourite toy, a large stuffed rabbit, sitting in a blue plastic chair and clutching a blade in its soft, lifeless paws, positioned as if it had been waiting for him all along. This was no longer just a game of mischief. This was a declaration of malevolent intent, a warning that the entity could strike at any moment, and with deadly precision. One evening, Marianne and Mark were settled downstairs, trying to find some semblance of normalcy amid the growing horror that had taken hold of their lives. The air was thick with unease, every creak and groan of the house setting their nerves on edge. They had put Robert to bed some hours ago, hoping that tonight would be different, that maybe, just maybe, the entity would finally give them peace. Suddenly the baby monitor crackled to life. "Robert, you're going to fall out of bed." The words were spoken with a chilling clarity, as though someone or something was in the room with their son. Marianne's heart stopped, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She exchanged a horrified glance with Mark, and without a second thought they bolted up the stairs, their feet pounding on the wooden steps, fear driving them faster than they had ever moved before. The hallway seemed to stretch infinitely as they raced to Robert's room. They burst into the room, breathless, expecting to see some horrific figure looming over their son. But Robert was lying peacefully in his bed, his chest rising and falling with the deep, steady rhythm of his breathing. The room was still. It was undisturbed, as if nothing at all had happened. Yet those words still hung in the air, reverberating through the silence. The voice had been so clear, so deliberate, but there was nobody there. Marianne stood frozen, her gaze locked on her sleeping son, a wave of helplessness crashing over her, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Whatever was haunting their home was not bound by the rules of a physical world. It could reach them, taunt them, and threaten her child, all while remaining untouchable. The poltergeist's presence in the house was no longer just a series of inexplicable noises or the odd misplaced object. It had begun to speak. One afternoon, as Marianne went about tidying up Robert's room, her eyes fell upon the brightly coloured doodle board on his little desk. As she looked a little closer, the hair on the back of her neck stood on end, because there, scrawled in jagged, childlike handwriting, was one single word: die. Marianne's breath caught in her throat. The word stared back at her, its meaning clear and its intent unmistakable. It was a threat, a direct attack aimed at her from whatever malevolent force had taken residence in their home. Shaking, she grabbed the board, as if erasing the message could somehow rid her of the terror it instilled, but it was only the beginning. The poltergeist's twisted communication continued, and soon other messages began to appear, each one more cryptic and unsettling than the last. One day, Marianne discovered a note on the board, again in childlike handwriting, that said, "Give it a chance." Another evening, Marianne and Mark returned home to find the house eerily quiet. They cautiously made their way through the rooms, checking to see if anything had been disturbed in their absence. Everything appeared to be in place, but the silence was almost more unsettling than the chaos that they had grown accustomed to. As they approached Robert's bedroom, Marianne noticed the doodle board again. She picked it up and scrawled across the surface in large, childlike letters were the words, "See you, see you, see you, see you." It didn't take long for Marianne and Mark to speculate that the letters meant "see you, see you, see you," as if the poltergeist was mocking them, taunting them with the promise of future encounters. Every time she saw one of these messages, it was as if the poltergeist was reaching out to her personally, playing with her emotions, testing her resolve. The house had become a prison, with the walls closing in around her. Marianne found herself dreading the simple act of walking into Robert's room, the fear of what she might find next gnawing at her constantly. The poltergeist was no longer just an unseen force. It was something with a mind, something with a cruel sense of humour, and something that had chosen her as its target. The messages felt like a twisted game, one she was being forced to play with an invisible opponent. And with each new word that appeared, Marianne's sense of dread deepened, the realization setting in that this was not going to end quickly or quietly. The entity was making itself known, asserting its presence in the most personal, invasive way possible. In a desperate attempt to protect her family, Marianne placed a prayer on Robert's bedroom door. However, when she returned, she found that the entity had scribbled over it violently with a red crayon, as if mocking her efforts to seek divine protection. This act of defiance was deeply unsettling for Marianne, as it suggested the entity not only had malevolent intentions, it sought to break her spirit. Mark, Marianne's partner, was also targeted. He was physically attacked by the entity. One of the most alarming incidents occurred late one night as Mark was walking down the stairs. The house was quiet, with the only sound being the soft creak of the wooden steps under his feet. Suddenly, and without warning, he felt a powerful shove against his back. He stumbled, grabbing the banister just in time to prevent a very nasty fall. As he caught his breath, he turned around, but there was nobody there. The hallway behind him was empty, but the intent was clear. The poltergeist was becoming increasingly physical. On another occasion, Mark was in Robert's room. He bent down to pick up a toy car, and a loud bang echoed through the room. He looked up just in time to see a large set of step ladders, which had been propped against the wall, crashing down towards him. He barely managed to leap out of the way, but not before the ladders clipped his shoulder, leaving him with a painful bruise that lasted for days. It was becoming clear that this entity wasn't just trying to frighten them, it wanted to hurt them. Perhaps the most unsettling experience for Mark occurred when he was alone in the house, sitting quietly in the living room, when out of nowhere the door to the hallway slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. Startled, Mark jumped up and ran to the door, but when he tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone or something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic set in as he pushed and pulled with all of his strength, but the door wouldn't move. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door flew open on its own, nearly throwing him to the ground. Mark had an experience when he was away from home visiting his mother's house, and while he was there, his mobile phone rang unexpectedly, and glancing at the caller ID, Mark was shocked to see that the call was coming from his own home. Why so disturbing? Well, he knew that the house was empty at the time. Nobody should have been there to make the call. When Mark answered the phone, there was nothing but silence on the other end. The line was dead, yet the call had undeniably come from his home. On another occasion, Mark received a text message from Marianne's phone while she was sitting right next to him, clearly not using her phone. Apparently the ghost became fond of sending these texts, which were often nonsensical or jumbled, which only added to the sense of confusion and fear. Numerous manifestations were seen in the home. Robert, the young boy, in addition to seeing a lady in his room, claimed to see a tall man with straight black hair, wearing a long black coat and a hat. This figure was often seen in Robert's room and was sometimes reported as floating above the bed or sitting on the sofa, leaving visible indentations on the cushions. Robert seemed to be the primary witness to this entity, but there were physical signs of its presence. The fact that this man isn't reported as having interacted with the family too much likely means that it was an entity separate to the poltergeist. Another shadowy figure, described as a white figure, was seen fleetingly by both Marianne and Mark in Robert's room. Unlike the tall man, this figure didn't have distinct features and was more of a vague, spectral presence. The white figure's appearance could suggest the presence of yet a different type of entity, one that was more passive or residual in nature. In addition to the tall man and the white figure, there were occasional reports of shadowy shapes or figures moving through the house, particularly in Robert's room and particularly seen in mirrors. These were often seen out of the corner of the eye as fleeting and dark silhouettes that would disappear as soon as you looked directly at them. These shadowy figures were elusive and didn't seem to have a consistent form or behaviour. Sam was described by Robert as a young boy around his own age. Robert referred to him as Sam or Sammy, and believed that Sam was a real person, albeit one that only he could see. There is no detailed description of Sam's physical appearance because the entity never fully manifested in a visible, tangible form for the adults in the house, but he appeared to be friendly at first, engaging Robert in what the boy perceived as innocent play. Robert would often talk about playing with Sam in his room, and there were several instances where Robert seemed to have conversations with this invisible companion. However, the nature of Sam's interactions with Robert grew increasingly sinister over time, because toys began to be moved around and found in strange or precarious and dangerous positions. Sam's presence was also tied to some of the cryptic messages that had appeared around the house, such as those on Robert's doodle board. If the house or the land it stands on has a long history, it might have accumulated residual energy, as they call it, from past events or people. This energy could manifest as different spirits or entities, especially if the site's been the scene of trauma, conflict, or intense emotions. Spirits associated with previous residents of the house or the land itself might still linger. For instance, a house that has seen multiple families or uses over the decade could have spirits connected to different eras. The intense energy from poltergeist activity could potentially act like a beacon, attracting other spirits or entities. In this theory, the disturbance caused by one entity might draw others to the location, leading to a sort of spiritual gathering. If the house's inhabitants are particularly vulnerable emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, they might inadvertently invite multiple entities into the space. This could happen through practices such as seances or the use of Ouija boards, or even just heightened fear and anxiety, which some believe can weaken personal boundaries and attract negative energy. It could even be that these multiple entities exist in parallel realities or dimensions and occasionally bleed through into our world. This could result in different spirits or entities appearing in the same place without necessarily being connected in any way to one another. Some paranormal theories suggest that a single entity might take on multiple forms or personalities to confuse or frankly terrorize the inhabitants. In this case, what appears to be many spirits might actually be one malevolent entity capable of shape-shifting or masquerading as different spirits. I also found this little snippet in a newspaper from 1965, which reads, "People in South Shields last night were wondering why tombs have been violated in one of the town's cemeteries. The most popular theories include black magic, experiments by medical students, a bet by a group of men, and even a poltergeist." The vaults are in Westow Cemetery. Councillor George Rossiter, a member of the town's Parks and Cemeteries Committee, said, "We cannot ignore anything, no matter how unlikely it may seem. Black magic seems a definite possibility for this type of thing and seems more prevalent these days. On the other hand, a poltergeist cannot be ruled out, for there has obviously been a very strong force at work here, and we have had such phenomena in South Shields before." In paranormal lore, there are many accounts of spirits who, rather than causing harm, act as guardians or protectors of a particular person or family. What if the tall man, Sam, or the lady were ancestors, or former inhabitants of the house, or even entities just attracted to the family's energy who feel compelled to shield them from harm? If multiple spirits were present, it's possible that some were actively working to counterbalance the malevolent activities of others. For instance, with one entity having been trying to instill fear and chaos, another might be acting to minimise harm or even warn the family of danger. If a protective spirit was present, it might have intervened in subtle ways to prevent more serious harm. For example, even though objects were thrown, no one was seriously injured. A spirit might have been controlling the force or direction of these attacks to ensure that they remained warnings rather than actual harm. In cases where malevolent entities are present, protective spirits might prevent these entities from gaining control over the living, i.e., yes, possession. If the family never experienced attempts at possession or complete takeovers by a spirit, a protective entity could have been responsible for that. There were instances where Marianne Mack and even their son Robert seemed to be personally targeted by the entity regardless of their location. For example, Mack experienced unnerving incidents at work, and Marianne reported feeling a lingering presence, even when she wasn't at home. And this could be interpreted as the entity infecting or attaching itself to them rather than being bound to a particular place. And despite the efforts of a local spiritualist church, which attempted to intervene by offering blessings and spiritual guidance, the phenomena did not cease. This suggests that the entity might have had more personal attachment to the family members rather than being confined to a physical location, an idea consistent with the infection or attachment phenomenon. This notion of an entity or force attaching itself to individuals rather than being confined to a single location is not unique to the South Shields Poltergeist case. It's been observed in other famous paranormal cases, further underscoring the mysterious and potentially pervasive nature of these hauntings. Skinwalker Ranch, one of the most notorious examples of what they call the hitchhiker effect, where visitors to the ranch, known for its huge range of paranormal phenomena, have reported strange occurrences following them home. These include poltergeist-like activities, strange lights, and feelings of being watched. It suggests whatever forces are at work on that ranch are not bound to the land itself, but can infect those who come into contact with them.
Hitchhikers. Well, yeah. You take things home with you. I took things to my house. Things happened to my wife, and not that it happened on the ranch. It was when they left the ranch, as you say, hitchhikers.
The Entity case of 1974. In this well-known case, a woman named Doris Byther claimed to be attacked by an unseen force in her home in California. Investigators reported that the disturbances seemed to follow her, suggesting an attachment or infection by an entity. The case was later dramatised in the 1982 film The Entity. The Bell Witch. This historic case from Tennessee, the Bell family were tormented in this one by a malevolent entity, and members of the family, particularly John Bell and his daughter Betsy, reported being followed by the presence, even when they were away from home. This suggests that the entity had attached itself to the family, again, rather than being bound to a particular location. Even Jeff, the Phantom Mongoose, yes, in my very first video on this channel about Jeff, the talking mongoose poltergeist, we hear of the entity following a family member to school. And in my own personal dealings with the paranormal, I have experienced this hitchhiker effect, having had something follow me home from a haunted location many years ago, and it was the most harrowing experience I've ever had, and the apparent attachment seemed to hang around for several months. In many poltergeist cases, objects are reportedly moved, thrown, or manipulated by an unseen force. The South Shields Poltergeist was not an exception, with numerous incidents of toys being thrown and furniture being moved, and objects like a rocking horse and the large stuffed rabbit being placed in disturbing positions. In the Enfield Poltergeist case of 1977, furniture was moved, toys were thrown around the room by an unseen force, and the case, which occurred in a council house in Enfield, London, involved two young sisters. It became one of the most famous poltergeist cases due to extensive media coverage and investigations by paranormal researchers, and this one was actually the subject of the film The Conjuring 2.
This is my home. Get out now.
You're going to die.
The South Shields Poltergeist case is also characterised by unsettling written messages such as "die" and "give it a chance," which appeared on Robert's doodle board. This form of communication is a common feature in poltergeist cases. The Borley Rectory, which is dubbed the most haunted house in England, was the site of numerous reports of paranormal activity, including the appearance of writing on the walls, supposedly left by spirits. The Battersea Poltergeist, a case from 1956, where 15-year-old Shirley Hitchings was at the centre of strange happenings, including the appearance of handwritten messages, supposedly from the poltergeist.
And as Shirley retells the chilling story for a new podcast, she joins us now. Good morning to you, Shirley. It's great to see you today.
Oh, it was horrendous. As you said, it started with a key, and that night the noises began. The police were called at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they heard it out in the street. Pots and pans would be thrown, and we had to dodge them, in case they hit you.
The South Shield case also, and quite terrifyingly, involves disembodied voices speaking through a baby monitor. The Enfield Poltergeist, again, featured disembodied voices, and they were a significant part of this case, with the voice of an old man, Bill Wilkins apparently, allegedly speaking through one of the sisters involved. This phenomenon was extensively documented by investigators and includes recordings of the voice.
Let me hear you say my name. Come on, let me hear you say my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it.
Morris. Right, that's good. I know. Shut up, your door. I'm 72 years old. I come from Jewel graveyard. And I have right near the church where Rita lives.
The Black Monk of Pontefract, from the 60s, known as one of the most violent poltergeist cases in the UK. This haunting involved disembodied voices which were heard by the Pritchard family in their home. The voice was often malevolent, contributing to the total fear and distress experienced by the family. And Mark, one of the primary witnesses in the South Shields case, was reportedly physically attacked by the entity, with incidents like being pushed or having objects thrown at him. Again, you can look back at the Enfield Poltergeist here, where the sisters were reportedly slapped, pushed, and even levitated by the entity.
At one point, the most frightening thing was when a curtain wrapped itself around my neck next to my bed.
So it felt, for you, as an 11-year-old, this felt malevolent?
Well, I was in bed and it was like I felt cold hands, and there was like a force that sort of pulled me out of bed. And sometimes I'd be pulled to my bedroom door, sometimes I'd be pulled up into the air.
Now, since this case has pseudonyms attached to it, we can indulge in a bit of sceptical speculation without risking damage to the reputations of anybody involved. So what if, and this is entirely speculative, what if all this was the actions of a spurned lover? Many of the phenomena described in the case, such as the rearranging of personal items, the threatening messages, and the physical attacks, could potentially be explained by the actions of a human agent, particularly someone with a motive like a spurned lover, or an individual harbouring a grudge. One of the key elements that would support this idea is that whoever's doing it would need intimate knowledge of the home. They would possibly know the layout, the schedules of the inhabitants, the personal details that could be exploited to create fear and confusion. The fact that one of the things that went missing was a wedding ring. If someone had access to the home, they could easily move stuff around, like the rocking horse or the stuffed rabbit, and stage them in menacing ways, such as hanging that horse by its reins or putting the rabbit with a box cutter at the top of the stairs. This would appear to be paranormal to those unaware of the intruder's presence. The written messages such as "die" on the doodle board or "give it a chance" could be the work of a person with a vendetta. These messages are personal. They're targeted, which is consistent with how someone holding a grudge might try to intimidate or manipulate. The chilling incident where Marianne and Mayak heard a voice over the baby monitor could be explained by someone with technological access. I mean, this is 2005, so it's not like it was ages and ages ago, or even just a proximity to the house using a similar frequency or device to broadcast a voice. If the person had access to a baby monitor or knew how to interfere with it, they could easily project their voice into the home, creating the illusion of a ghostly presence. Mark's experience of being pushed or having items fall on him, such as the stepladder, could potentially be staged. If someone had been secretly in the home, they could have set up these scenarios or even physically attacked Mark themselves without being seen, particularly in a moment of confusion or distraction, such as cleaning up cars that look like they've been thrown around the room. Or they might be Mark's own way of explaining away Marks left behind from a physical rendezvous. The suggestion that multiple entities were involved, like the shadowy figures or the appearance of Sam, could be explained as psychological manipulation by a person who was deliberately creating scenarios to terrify this poor family. For example, Sam could have been introduced into Robert's mind by a person deliberately feeding the child stories or ideas, which then manifest as seemingly paranormal experiences. While the idea of a spurned lover, or let's say somebody with malicious intent at least, staging these events is plausible. I mean, Ian found a lot of this stuff, didn't he? What about confirmation bias in all of this? The tendency, that is, to search for, or interpret, and recall information that confirms your pre-existing stance or belief. It could have played a significant role in this case. This psychological phenomenon might have influenced both the experiences of those directly involved in the haunting and the interpretations of the people investigating it. Once Marianne and Mark started believing that their home was haunted, confirmation bias might have led them to interpret ordinary occurrences as evidence of paranormal activity. For example, a cup falling off a worktop or a door creaking. It could be seen as further proof of the haunting rather than just everyday occurrences. Stuff like that happens, doesn't it? Random or coincidental events like lights flickering or just weird sounds here and there, they might have been interpreted as signs of a poltergeist presence because they fit into that idea. This confirmation bias can cause individuals to overlook or discount evidence that contradicts a belief. In the context of the South Shields case, the family and the investigators might have dismissed these more mundane explanations for spooky phenomena, just drafts, faulty wiring, or, let's face it, the imagination of a child of Robert's age. Incidents that didn't fit the pattern of a haunting might also have been excluded. We might not know about things that happened that didn't fit this narrative, as they would say nowadays, even if they could have provided a more rational explanation for what was happening. And once the belief in a haunting was established, confirmation bias could have shaped how experiences were interpreted. I mean, humans, we seek patterns, don't we? We look for patterns even where there might not be one. And in a haunted house, the family might have started to see connections between unrelated events. A drop in temperature, a weird noise, a thing on a shelf where you don't remember putting it, all coordinated into paranormal activity. Marianne and Mark and others involved in the case might have reinforced each other's beliefs through discussions where they collectively interpreted events as paranormal and dismissed non-paranormal explanations. The involvement of like-minded individuals, such as the spiritualist church members or paranormal investigators, could have created an echo chamber effect where only supportive evidence was discussed and contrary evidence just got omitted. The simple exhaustion and stress of two overworked and sleep-deprived parents is another plausible factor in all of this, especially when you consider the psychological effects of chronic fatigue. This hypothesis suggests that Marianne and Mark might have just been so overwhelmed by their daily responsibilities and their lack of sleep that they misinterpreted or even just imagined some of this stuff that was going on. Sleep deprivation's a terrible thing. It can impair cognitive function, it messes with your memory, your attention span, just your perception. It really makes you take things to heart a lot more, Marianne and Mark might have just forgotten moving objects themselves. Or misplaced items. I mean, good Lord, I lose my keys every 10 minutes, Doesn't mean a ghost's got them. It just means I can't remember where I put them. And if I find them later in an unexpected location, it's because I've put them there, mindlessly doing so, because I've been thinking about something else, or I'm just too damn tired to remember. Exhausted minds are more prone to perceptual distortion, which could explain seeing weird shadowy figures and misinterpreting just normal sounds as something sinister. Even hearing voices that aren't really there, and a chronic lack of sleep can lead to increased anxiety and paranoia, and it makes you much more likely to see something as a threat or an invasion when it might just be nothing. And then there is the presence of a 3-year-old Robert in the house. This could easily account for some of the phenomena described, especially if we're looking at the situation through a more sceptical and grounded lens. So children, they're curious, aren't they? And they get into all sorts, and they move faster than you think they do, and they can tip a room upside down in seconds. Toys, personal items, household objects. They can move bits of furniture that aren't too heavy. If a child's exploring their environment, stuff's going to move around. A 3-year-old might not remember where they've put something, which makes it look like the object has disappeared and then it's reappeared in a shoe or in the fridge or something daft. Toys found in unusual places could just be a child moving it around. Threatening messages on the doodle board, like die and see you, could just be Robert drawing, experimenting. He might have heard or picked up words and phrases, and, children that age are learning to write, and they'll mimic things that they see or hear. I mean, I don't know why a 3-year-old would write die on a board, but it might not be what he was trying to write. He might have been trying to write something else, and it just looked like that. Although one of the messages did say, give it a chance. Pretty specific, isn't it? But while some of the larger movements of furniture, for example, might be beyond the capability of a 3-year-old, smaller things like chairs, lightweight objects, they can be moved by kids just while they're playing with them. Especially his toy cars and his blocks being found in different rooms, or the rocking horse moving on from the stairs to the bedroom and back. Could easily have been the kid. And of course, kids make a mess, don't they? They knock stuff over, they scatter things everywhere, they draw on walls and other surfaces. The prayer that was nailed to the door. Who's to say the kid didn't just see a piece of paper and draw all over it? Why not? The chaotic nature of what kids do can sometimes feel inexplicable, especially if you're exhausted and you already think your house is haunted and everybody you talk to tells you it is. Or maybe the place was just haunted. Who knows, eh? You let me know what you think about this one, please. Hit the like button, please. It's the thumbs up button in the corner there. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And share this video with your friends. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.